All right, Zig coming in on the top today in the show. We have singer-songwriter Dan Montgomery. The Memphis-based singer-songwriter has a large collection, a large repertoire of Americana music that dips its toes into rock and roll. But now, on his latest release, Cast Iron Songs and Torch Ballads, it dives headfirst into the rock. Cast Iron Songs and Torch Ballads is available on all streaming platforms, and you can get a real rad vinyl edition from danmontgomery.com. Everything's linked below. This was a really cool conversation. I like diving into the headspaces of the songwriter to see the bleak moments that mean nothing to nobody, but for someone who is crafting a tune or capturing an image, it becomes a whole journey. And Dan gets into it. This conversation was really cool. We dive into like some of the ideas of like physical meditation in a way, where your body's doing something so mundane you don't have to think about it, but it gives you that space where your mind can wander and come across these beautiful ties in between ideas and narratives that maybe wouldn't have happened because you're so focused on other things. And also, Dan toured with Ben Vaughn. A few months ago, I did an interview with Ben Vaughn, so if you're a fan of Ben and you hear these references and want to know what they mean, you can dive back into the Zig at the Gig catalog and check out that conversation. Before moving on, we're going to listen to a track. This is Lonesome Train off Cast Iron Songs and Torch Ballads. Lonesome Train, Cast Iron Songs and Torch Ballads, Dan Montgomery, available now on all streaming platforms. Before we get into this conversation, one last thing. If you can like, rate, review the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it really helps me keep talking to cool guests and sharing their insights with you. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Dan. Like, starting off, I want to know, because I've only been to Memphis once, and there's like a magic to it. Like, and it's interesting because you've done a lot of traveling and wound up there. And I wanted to hear all about, like, with Ben Vaughn, because I got to pick his brain like a couple months ago.
Yeah, I heard that. It was a really good interview with him.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, man. Thanks for listening.
Well, you started off by mentioning don't spill no ketchup on my toast bread, which threw the whole thing into like, this guy did research.
Yeah, like, I try to just listen to the music, how it sends me, and just really focus on that and then dive in. But, like, as far as, like, Memphis, like, because, like my cousins went there for a thing and then, like, for a job, and, like, he moves around a lot, so he's only there for a bit, or just either way, we met up with him there and we did Beale Street and, like, went to the Crossroads.
When was that?
This is probably 2013, something, years ago, a long time.
Yeah.
And, like, there's something so magic about it. And, like, I don't know if it's because, like, all this stuff came from there. But as someone who's traveled a lot, what was it that kind of, like, or was it that made you settle there? Was it the girl at the time, or was it the place?
Both. I mean, yeah, you're right. There is this magic about Memphis. And is it because of what's happened here, or is it what happened here happened because it's magic? That's really the question. And in 20 years, I can't really tell you, which is kind of the beautiful thing about it.
Because, like, being around, like, it's interesting being, like, a songwriter and trying to do your original thing in, like, places that are highly musical. Like, there's a lot of competition, I feel. I'm kind of lucky to be here in Cleveland, where we have a very, like, kind of inspirational, growing scene that is quite busy. And it may be just because I've always been here, I find a place in it. But as someone that just moves to different spots and, like, kind of, like, jumps in, and especially something as, like, heavy as, like, Memphis or, like, Nashville, like, where do you even get started, you know?
Well, Nashville scares the bejesus out of me, I'll be honest, because I don't have that. I don't really have a good built-in self-promotion thing to fall back on. Like, some people are really good at the pitch and all, and as you'll probably find out over the course of this talk, I'm not. But one thing about Memphis, like, I came to Memphis, I was 40 when I moved here. And one thing about Memphis is there's always a music scene going on. It kind of morphs and changes every few years and all. But a really great thing about Memphis is that if you come to town here and you declare yourself an artist or a musician or a painter or a filmmaker or something, people will give you a chance to prove it. Okay. And then the rest is up to you and luck, you know. But people are very open to, like, you know, somebody new comes to town and and not even in a challenging way. People want to see what you have. Yeah. And, like, after that, it's up to you what you do with it. Whereas a lot of other big music cities, that is not the case at all.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like that scarcity. Like, well, if there's another guy, I don't get a gig. You know what I mean? So, like, that's cool.
Yeah, it's sort of that way. I have to say that. And there's a very good, like I said, I came here a bit older, but I was new, so I interacted a lot with a lot of the younger artists and bands. And I never found the age thing to be any kind of barrier at all. It's just a matter of if people think you're delivering the goods, I think. And there's not a lot of business here in a lot of ways. You know, people leave here to go do other stuff. So it's easy for people to be more communal when there isn't a lot of industry, you know, hovering over things, I think.
That makes sense too. Yeah, and then it's just it's communal. It's like
yeah, I think 1966 to 1973, maybe that might have been a different situation when this was like a recording capital of the world. That might have been put a lot more pressure on people in all kinds of ways, but it's really not that way here now. Although there's tons of great music coming out of here all the time. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, like the one day out, like the few days we were there, like going just up and down Beetle Street, there was just like you can go in any club, and there was something different happening, and outside the clubs, you're just like,
Yes, yeah,
it's inescapable.
yeah. When I first came to town, a guy that had booked me some shows. He used to book this place on Beale Street called the New Daisy Theater, which is a pretty big theater. But he used to book me. I was always trying to play inside, and he's like, "I'll book you outside, and you'll make more money with tips." And that was the case when I finally played inside. I played open for somebody in front of 700 people. I made $100, whereas I played on the street. I made a couple $100.
It's interesting too because like you're getting people who aren't committed to one performance. They're just walking by and they're like, "Oh, that's cool," and like there's so much effort that's put into that one. Like you set the stage, so to say, so succinctly to make a one performance work right. You know what I mean? With all the promotion and all the trying to get people in these seats and trying to push. There's so much into like one show in a play in a way compared to just walking by, and I think that's kind of like in a weird way like how the internet works as far as like music, like you're on the digital street,
Yes.
so you really got to busk everything you do. Like
That's a good way of putting it because, like, yeah, and that's kind of like where the competition is more these days, is because the great thing about music now is anybody can put out a record, and the worst thing about music is anybody can put out a record.
yeah,
Because, like, how do you find these things? So that's a really great way to put it. Is it's very much like busking on the street. How do you get their attention and draw them in? When I was the sound man for the Ben Vaughn combo, we were touring. We did a bunch of shows opening for Mojo Nixon because we were on the same label, and he was real big at the time. And his road guy was a guy named Bullethead, who I think is still his manager to this day. And we had these merch wars where we'd set up across from each other at the end of the show and try to get the most attention to sell, because we were both like paying our rent by selling merch back then, And we were having about an equal war, and then one day they came in with a bullhorn, and it was all over. They got everybody's. It was like, oh man. So yeah, it's all about getting that attention. Yes, and that's why things like these are so great to go on a show like this, and you broadcast to people that you wouldn't reach otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. And like this,
So thank you for doing this.
well, thank you. Like it only works if I have people that are inspiring to talk to, and like the part of this for me was just to like to find insight and inspiration, and it's cool that other people dig it too, and it's cool that people are willing to endure my canter to
Well, it could be a two-way street if it works well, and it seems to be so.
Well, thanks, man.
Sure.
That's hilarious though with the bullhorn, like the shiny things that get our attention, like whoa, louder.
Oh yeah. I mean that's the bane of every musician is playing in a bar where the TV's on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because so you learn to hate TV because it becomes your that's your competition more than anything else sometimes.
Was it? And bar gigs are so tricky. Like, so I guess the one thing that is really like amazing about the setting the stage and playing in the venue compared to like the bar is like everyone in the bar or everyone in the venue is there for the show, even if they didn't come to see you. If you're opening, you're in front of who they want to see. They're waiting to watch you be done. Like whatever it is.
Ideally,
ideally, you're right. Ideally, they're not showing in late. But like in the other sense, like when you're in the bar, like you're also fighting the people that are there. That I'm here to catch up with Frank. Oh, you're here. Like there's someone over there being loud. And like just the sheer like kind of like battle against the room to like prove your self-worth, I guess. But in that sense,
well, yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna say in that sense, it's a whole different mindset you go into it. You know what I mean? Like you live for the room when they pay attention, but like, and also when it does get quiet and you can hear them listen, you're like, oh, I got one.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And that's the thing. You got to as soon as you think you developed the perfect set, you can pretty much figure it's going to go out the window when you go play somewhere, because the atmosphere of the room can change it at a moment's notice.
Right. Right.
And and if you think that if you just have one thing down, it may not apply to every situation. So you got to be flexible. You got to be in the moment, and you got to have a thick skin when you're playing, the bar gigs. But I mean, I came up doing that, so it's not an unusual thing for me. I came up playing, dances and parties and bars when I was a teenager.
Right. You started
So
when you were 14, right?
yeah. I was in my first band. I was a cover band. I was 14. I was the youngest member of the band, and we played dances and parties, and it was great. It was like we were playing, what now would be incredibly unhip, because it was all like Bad Company and Bachman Turner Overdrive and that stuff. But that was new rock then. Everybody's like, "Oh, it's classic rock." Like, well, that was the new rock then,
But those
And
are
it
all,
was pre-punk.
yeah.
2 years later, that happened, and everybody in my first band at that point went in completely different directions. One guy, I really embraced punk. One guy got really into country. One guy got really into prog. And it was just like, well, we have nothing to say to each other.
So yeah, and also being like, well, how much older were the rest of the guys in the band? If you were 14 at
About
that time.
5 years. So there's a big jump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they've already kind of had that bite of that thing you get at that age where you're like, oh, this is cool. I embrace that. Like what punk bands did that for you? If you were around Jersey.
Well,
Sorry.
Well, Patti Smith initially.
Okay.
That's kind of the gateway drug for me. And she's originally from Pittman, which is like 20 minutes from where we grew up. It was very much a big local hero kind of thing. But I had one of those epiphany moments where I was 15, I guess, and I was at a party, and teenager party, and this girl asked me, who was a couple years older than me, asked me if I liked rock and roll, and I said I used to, but I don't think there's any real rock and roll anymore. And she said, "Come with me." And I went into this bedroom with her, and I thought, "Oh my God, this is the moment," And instead, she turned out all the lights and put on horses from start to finish. And when it was over after Elegy, I was so out of breath, I didn't even care about what I thought was going to be happening there. And it was like everything had shifted. And I just had to go out the next day and get that record, And that opened up to like, the Ramones and Television and stuff. And a lot of those bands, like the Ramones, originally, because I was a very serious singer-songwriter kind of guy, I thought it was kind of silly. And then when I saw them, it was like, oh, I get it. This is genius.
Yeah. Well, yeah, as a songwriter, you're right, because it's like fast thought I would like, fast thought I would not like. You know what I mean? Like, there's no burying the lead there. It's highlighted and next. But that makes sense. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, it reminded me of that thing, if you ever seen that, one of the Stooges documentaries where Iggy said when they started writing the first record, his theory became 25 words or less should be the lyrics.
But that's like, it's very like Hemingway 6-word story type, thing, like how do you say something in a very condensed way that everyone can either relate or misrelate to,
Yes. And the Ramones thing, it's just, when you look back at it, like I said, once I saw them live too, it was very much like, it was this complete package too. Like what people were kind of like dismissing as being kind of goofy and dumb. It was like, this is a really like put together thing, from how they look to how the brevity of it to the presentation of it, just genius.
Yeah. Well, and like you're saying, like as a unit, the whole thing, and like, well, just the kind of like, because that emotion was right there, and because it was like so alien in a way, like this like fast music, which I mean, like there's bands that come down the road that show that the fastness doesn't matter, but like it's like that, like that the beauty of that 6-song story or 6-word. I'm mixing my words. 6-word story.
Well, when I got hit with the Ramones and Patti Smith and all that stuff, I was coming off like a couple of years of very much liking like the Dead and stuff. So the shifting gears was really important and dramatic for me, because my problem with the Dead became they just got so slow. Like I saw them live, like saw them in like '76 the first time, and it was really great. And then it just got slower and slower. And then this other thing, like, oh no, I was right. This is what I'm looking for.
Like there's a beauty to the slowness, but like there's something
Oh
like
yeah,
there's something that if it can encompass you like that and like energize you in that way, like and I don't know, and maybe it's the relatability of the Ramones. Like it seems so doable, but it's not. It like their songs seem so like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But when you go to write a
I
Ramones
that's
style
why
song, you know,
that's why 40 years later or however long it's been, bands are not only still people are not only still listening to songs, bands are trying to be that band still
yeah,
because it's and certainly for a first band, it seems like the perfect template to start with.
oh yeah,
I mean, like the question is, do you do anything more than that after that, and do you need to either?
right. Well, because I guess like if you really analyze like the band itself, the energy is there when you see them, when you see any performance live or just listen to the record. There's the excitement and like the relatability is right up front, and like in the sense of like a band, okay, where they're all wearing, they look like the unit. And like one of my favorite parts about the Ramones is like how they were like Johnny Appleseed of punk. Everywhere they went, bands sprouted. Because
Oh God,
it's
yeah.
yeah, it seemed doable, and it seemed like if they can do something and be this unique, I can. And like, if anything, that's why they're always going to be. That's why they'll be timeless forever. Like,
Well, there's that quote, especially Brian Eno said about the Velvet Underground, about they only sold 30,000 copies, but everybody that bought a copy started a band, and the
yeah,
Ramones is like the next generation of that. I think that they probably sold a lot more records, oddly enough, but more than that, probably every third person that bought a record started a band.
yeah, for sure. I
So
like
yeah, they are definitely the Johnny Appleseeds of punk more than anyone else.
so so you get into the punk bite, and what a beautiful like story of that. Like that's so cool because Patti Smith is like, and having that writer's mindset, like she definitely
Yeah.
delivers with that, and like that's like that. That's a poem how you described hearing that record for the first time. Um, so going into like this like because you got to get your like your ground, you got to get the like physicality of actually playing songs and how bands work and doing the bar circuit. So after getting exposed to like punk in that sense and the band splits up, is this when like is this when you start your own like original group? My name's slipping. uh Fudge, I totally forgot the name of your first band.
uh, Drunk Before Breakfast, or that
Yeah.
was a later band.
Okay. No. No.
I well, I was in my teenage band, and that kind of fell apart. And then punk happened, and I started a band that really went nowhere. We were terrible, terrible. I had never fronted a band before or anything, and that kind of scared me off for a little bit. So I spent a lot of time doing a lot of solo things at like folk clubs in Rutgers University in Camden, New Jersey, which is around where I grew up, even though I was not a college person or anything. And so I was kind of going back and forth between the two worlds. And it was funny. I used to play this place at Rutgers, and it was a folk club. And it was called the Perimeter, and you played completely on no electric, no PA, nothing. And people sat there and listened to you quietly, and it totally like spoiled me for what was to come. And then like I got my foot in the punk thing, and it was like the total opposite of it. So I've always had my feet in kind of two worlds that way. And then I started working with the Ben Vaughn combo, and I kind of didn't do anything musically for other than running sound and eventually becoming a road manager for quite a few years, and then I went back to playing after that.
So that's a really interesting kind of like view, like a very internal kind of view to then a very external kind of view. It's interesting those crowds where you play in the room where all they do is listen. Like we have a couple venues in Cleveland that that's kind of like it's a songwriter's room. When when the artist is playing, you listen. And
Mhm.
it's a really cool environment to be in, and like it really kind of makes you hone into every moment being as impactful as the next in a way. But like there's also that kind of like, oh, we won them over. I've earned this stillness. When you're playing the shitty bar gigs that tune in and then they listen and you get that attention for a moment. It's kind of like a mini victory. There's
Oh yeah, like when you're playing a bar gig and like the other guitar player takes some really raving hot solo and people react to that.
Yeah.
And it's like it's like now it's like you're in a jazz gig. People are reacting to the solos and stuff.
Yeah.
You don't always have to bring them down to the silent moment either.
Yeah, well, it's the dynamics are interesting too when you work that musically and see how that interacts. But you're right, like, and then or just like a blues gig when you hear those live blues records when someone takes a solo, you hear the crowd go nuts afterwards, and the next guy goes same thing. Like, it's like, oh, I long for that minor attention. But
and the thing is, today, like, so many people are, used to. Yeah, you can go on YouTube and see a 9-year-old kid shredding
right
all day long. That when somebody hits a solo now and it really moves people, whether it's a beautiful melodic thing or some crazed, over the top rock thing, when you get people's attention with a solo these days, you're really doing something because people are just used to, oh, there will be a solo now.
Yeah, and they're
so when you can get with that, and you got somebody who's really communicating.
And that, I guess, with like, just like you're saying, there's so much of like you can hear good stuff anywhere. Like the staple that if you're not completely killing it, if it's not like 110% like the average of rock and guitar solo and then beyond, it's gonna get kind of lost in the ether of like being in the room on your phone or whatever. It's interesting the kind of standard that sets in a way, or new standard, because man, it's hard to keep up.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't know. Like, I don't have kids, so I don't know what kids are watching or listening to. So like, I don't even know what those standards are in a lot of ways. So I just keep plugging away doing what I'm doing. And I'm really lucky that I have a great band here. So, I can really work at best of both worlds. I can do I tend to do like a band tour, then a solo tour, then a band tour, then a solo tour.
Nice. So well, and I think that's like so I've been trying to do that same type of thing as someone who has a school schedule. You know what I mean? Like I've been trying to do the Weekend Warrior Dash by myself and like play the acoustic loopy gig and then come back with the band after meeting some people. But ever since 2020, it's been an uphill battle.
Oh yeah, well, I had a full-time job until just this August, so I've been doing along with other stuff, and then the pandemic happened. We had a health crisis here at home. It was not COVID related. That's been a long ongoing thing, and so like when my last album came out, it's an album called Smoke and Mirrors, and it came out literally the week that everything shut down. So the tour was canceled. Went down, so that just fell between the cracks. So we were getting ready to start everything up with this new record again. And it's like we just finally played as a band our first 2 gigs in 3 years in the last couple of months, and it was like, oh, this feels so good. I can't wait to so now I'm in the middle of booking a tour for June, and I just can't wait to get out there and do it again. But yeah, booking is not as easy as it was before the pandemic, and people are trying to make up for all the money they lost. I can't blame them for being more
picky.
Yeah. They got their nut to make too. But we are looking for a gig in Cleveland if anybody likes what they hear here.
Yeah, let's put a pin in that. I'll give you some info at the end of this.
I did play I played the Beachland Ballroom Tavern a couple years ago when I opened for Ben when Vaughn when he was here.
Oh yeah, nice. Yeah,
it was a really cool little room. Yeah, I really liked that a lot.
Yeah, the Beachland's awesome. I did a lot of streaming work in the pandemic for the Beachland and the Grog Shop, when everyone was trying to do that bit.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I guess to kind of unpin some of that like external view. So like when you're touring with Ben and like seeing how he works and handles rooms and like learning how to handle like the never ending quest, or the never ending like factor, which is the people and being in different rooms and how they interact. Like setting up a set like that, or just even like what type of tunes would happen. What are some kind of like, I guess, songwriting and performance like lessons that came from those experiences that you still find
Oh,
yourself falling upon today?
oh, it was in retrospect, it was a master class
Yeah.
in how to, first of all, how to write a set list. Because when I first started working with the band Montgomery, when we were playing locally in Philly, we'd play they would play 3 sets a night. So, and Ben would write out a set list, for each of the sets, and it had to be to make copies. This is before people had printers or anything, so I had to write them all out. So you start to see patterns in how sets are made, and then you also start to see how they get abandoned when the crowd needs something different. I learned a lot about how to treat your band members, how to get by on $5 a day on tour.
Yeah.
I learned a lot of things, but most of all, how to work a crowd and how to adapt to them as well. And it was 5 years of it was something I would never learn in college, that's for sure.
So like, was his like approach like, was there a pattern that you seemed like, so in a new town, this seems to be the go-to. You start with this, like, was it like a busking idea number, like, oh, this draws the attention in, like, you know what I mean? Like, was there like a kind of pattern like that you noticed?
Well, there's always there's a the opening number, it's going to be up tempo, and it's going to be some kind of sense of inviting people in.
Okay.
And something about what it presents seems inviting. And then, like, say, like the third or fourth song in, there would usually be like a surf instrumental. There's just certain little things, you knew where to place the ballad, so it wasn't like if you place the ballad the next to last song, as soon as you get done, they're going to say, "That's it, you're off," and cut you short, things like that. So you got to know where to place certain things like that. But like I said, the biggest thing I learned was learning very quickly in a moment how all those things can be abandoned because the crowd needs something different. So, like, you say your set rules can go out you have to be ready to abandon them really quickly.
So like it would be like if a room's really dancing to a thing, like extending that and driving all the other ones like that to keep them on the.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, and Ben's a good example of that. And I had the same thing where if you started out playing dances and parties, that's what happens. You want to keep people dancing.
Right. Well, I find myself doing a lot of since high school. I've been doing a lot of like, and I guess the answer to anything musical is you say yes just about anything until you can get to a place where you can really hone in what you're doing and make that the main thing. But I would say yes to most gigs, like whatever they are, and like one of which was like I ended up doing some DJ gigs, which wound me up in like some nursing homes. So I would do some nursing home DJ gigs, and then I would do some nursing home gigs where I would go around with my guitar room to room, and then in the main room, and then a lot of weddings, and like to whatever. It's like there's no right way to get that room grooving, but when they do, it's like, how do I keep this going? It's
exactly. Yeah, you don't want it to stop by any means. And I mean, another thing is when you come up, and I think it doesn't happen as much for a lot of bands, certainly in like towns like Philly, New York, or something. When you came up, you inevitably did a couple of years playing in cover bands,
right.
and you learned a lot of things you're not going to learn just by watching people on YouTube. Like all of a sudden, because you spent 2 years playing songs that maybe the bass player wanted to play and you didn't really like, but all of a sudden you realize, oh, the way that structure, that bridge, I could use that in something here. It's all knowledge you're going to use down the line.
Right.
It's almost like, I almost think in a way it's like how it used to be years and years and years ago that, when somebody got out of school, they were supposed to do like 2 years of service to their country. It's like, if you're going to be a musician, you should do 2 years of service in a cover band.
I think
and you'll
yeah.
just get a lot out of it, But you also have to remember that the cover band is probably where you're going to make the most money, so you got to be careful of that trap too.
Right. Well, I think the introspective, like kind of creative individual gets the I'm doing this. I'm enjoying saying what I do is I play music. This is the thing I want to do. But like the I think there's a longing for more because you're right. That is a good high paying circuit. Like you can really hone that in and like make that what you do. But to get that same reaction to something you wrote is a whole nother experience. And you're like, I want to live off this. Like, not
That's
financially,
the
just like
hard part about
spiritually.
trying to do once is that that's the hard part about trying to do those two things at once. Is that you inevitably get your heart broken because people are responding more to the songs they know.
Right, right. Which, makes sense. Like neurologically, you like dopamine's going off when you know how it's going to resolve and when you know what it
Exactly. Yeah.
is. It's
Yeah.
and whatever theories we need to tell ourselves.
Exactly. Yes.
But
But it's never going to hurt you to learn to play another song either. By the
yeah.
same token.
So like so to kind of like jump back into like so as you were like before that you're doing this like this songwriting circuit yourself and as at like coming from a band that was doing like Bad Company and like all these like rock tunes and Grand Funk and there's so much in that that's like it's interesting like how tunes like that like instead of just playing it plays like a riff. You know what I mean? Like as opposed to just a chord and like certain things get buried just because you can't put too much on top of that. But so diving from this kind of like rock world into this songwriting world, um, was it Patti Smith that really made those lyric like ideas like want to be your drive, or were you driven by something else before that Patti Smith just kind of put like the vitamin B12 on?
Yeah, more the vitamin B12.
Okay.
I got very moved by when I was about 14 or so with the third Jackson Brown album called "Late for the Sky,"
Yeah. Okay.
and I really, although I didn't understand a lot of it lyrically because it was way above my head, and I hadn't had my heart broken deep enough yet. But there was a lot I liked about it musically too. And then I discovered there's a Randy Newman album called "Good Old Boys," and there's a song on there called "Marie," and it was just this most beautiful thing I ever heard with these just lush strings and all. But as I listened to the lyric, I realized, the guy in the song is just horrible, and he's just confessing how. And I was like, wow, you can write a really beautiful love song and be the bad guy, and that struck me as a very interesting way to approach things too. And that kind of opened me up to like listening to things differently. And then the Patti Smith thing, like you said, just kind of put the vitamin B12 on things. I always remember when I first got Horses, I was listening to it in my bedroom at home. Like I said, I'm like 15 and I'm playing it and it's really loud. My mother stops by the door and she's listening to it and she just goes, "Is she from New Jersey?" I was like, "From Pittman." She goes, "Yeah, that makes sense." And she just walked away.
That's a great parent reaction to horses.
Yeah, yeah. And it was so I always had my feet or my ears in two different worlds. And when I made my first record, I was in a period of moving a lot. So I didn't have a band or anybody with me at that time. So I kind of made my first record too based on the idea that I would be playing it live a lot solo. That put more of an emphasis on the melodic side of things and the lyric side of things in a way. And it did kind of pigeonhole me a bit as I when I started doing more full band things, people are kind of like, "Oh, you do that too?" And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, I did that first, but
Yeah.
potato came in.
Well, it's like it's weird because I guess the line like because I think everyone kind of guitar wise is drawn into the sound of the guitar, right? And then like like it's saying its own thing. Like for me, I was like, oh, AC/DC, like what I don't know what the guy's singing about, but that guitar, dun, 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 chords, riffs, like it's right there, and like that's its own feat itself. But then when you think about, oh wait, someone had to write something on top of this, and that makes sense, like that's amazing too. How do they do that? And like, because I found myself going down the same kind of rabbit hole in a way, like starting with like a lot of this rock driven tunes and being really into how those work, and then the realization that, oh, it's really hard to keep a band going if no one's writing anything, and diving into that world. And that's been like a whole fascination of mine now, and like, and through the process of it. But some things that the guitar says, like when you're in this rock like oriented situation that you have to adapt to a more like singer-songwriter situation, is kind of the same thing, but it's almost you have to like strip it back in a way to make it more of just a chord as opposed to like a lick on A. Does that make, you know what I mean? And
oh yeah, I mean that's the whole job when you're in that position is, yes, you can write, a heavy riff and a song to go around with it, around that all, but can you just sit down and play on an acoustic guitar and still be a song and not just a riff?
yeah.
Yeah. And I'm in a really great position where is the guy that plays guitar with me, plays most of the lead stuff, and is my co-producer, Robert Mache, who's just this amazing guitar player. I was a really huge fan of a band called the Dream Syndicate when I was around 20. And I followed them through, and then Steve Wynn, who was the leader of that band, he started a solo career. And when I first saw him playing solo, he had this amazing guitar player that was Robert Mache. And I was just fascinated by his playing. It was just one of my favorite guitar players I ever saw. I saw him play a few times. And so fast forward 20 some years later, I'm working in a coffee shop in Memphis, and Robert Mache walks in. And him and his wife had just washed up there after Katrina. And because his wife is originally who's also the one who sings on our records, Candace Mache, she was originally from Memphis. And just started talking to him. And I immediately knew who he was. I recognized him. And after a bit of time of just getting to know him, we started playing together. So it was like, all of a sudden one day I had one of my favorite guitar players in the world playing with me. We have to make the most of this.
Yeah. Well, and it's like those moments are so like you work so hard and you admire this person, and like they become almost like a statue figure. You know what I mean? Someone you abide to abide in.
Right now in my office.
Say what?
A poster. Okay. I'm looking right now in my office at a poster of this from the Steve Wynn show that I actually met Robert out in 1991. So it's like. And like I didn't know that was going to happen. 20 years later, he was going to be one of my best friends and in my band and my producer and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's amazing how these things come around, and you just got to be ready for them when they do. And he's also he's this amazing guitar player, amazing producer and mixer and engineer and all. But he's also this really encouraging guitar player. So whereas on the new record, Cast Iron Songs and Torch Ballads, I'm playing the riffs and the leads on like 3 or 4 songs, which I would have never imagined would have happened 20 years ago,
Yeah. Wow. Like,
it's just like he's like, well, you're doing that now. I'll just do this instead on that, and it'll make it into something else, So it's been, he's not only just makes your records better, he makes you better as a player by, encouraging you. It's really wonderful.
And it's like those things like that, those like moments of like real, like, oh man, I'm so glad, I was so moved by him as opposed to like, I don't know, that someone who would do the opposite. You know what I mean? Like
oh yeah,
like those heroes and those like people we admire when they live up to these like unrealistic expectations that they deliver on, and like not intentionally, but just because of who they are, makes you feel so much better about being so obsessed with them.
Yeah, they always say don't be heroes, but actually most of the time I have been pretty good.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I had a terrible encounter with David Byrne, but it was my fault. So
oh
that's
no.
okay. I was literally at a play in Philadelphia, and it was the intermission was just about over. They were flashing the lights, and I ran off to use the restroom.
Yeah.
And as I was literally running into the restroom, and I literally ran smack into David Byrne,
Oh my God.
of all people.
Yeah. Wow.
And I don't know why. Like, we just kind of like banged into each other, and I don't know why. I just looked at him. I said, "Hey, your suit fits." And he's just like, "Oh, asshole," and just walks away. And I really don't blame him.
Oh, that was a fast one-liner. I'm impressed that I would be like,
I
what?
don't know why I thought to say that. There's 100 things I could have said. It would have been better.
Oh man. Well, yeah, but like, that's.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's incredible. I think that's an all right one. That's one I would, I could be like, yeah, I messed up that one too. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh man.
But most of the times I've met people I really admired have actually turned to be very good, I have to say. So, but I never wanted to meet Jerry Lee Lewis. I just wanted to admire him from afar.
Yeah, that might be all right.
Yeah.
Like, well, I mean, he's around. He's like probably he's in Memphis, right? Or is he in Nashville?
Well, he passed about 6 months ago now, I guess.
Oh, really? Damn.
Yeah. He finally passed. He always swore he would be the last one standing of all the original Sun people. He was.
Holy shit. That's a bummer.
Yeah, he passed about 6 months ago. Yeah.
I didn't hear anything about that. Wow.
It was weird. 2 days before, I think it was, he got the Country Music Hall of Fame, inducted him finally.
Yeah.
And then he passed. Because the word had always been they were going to wait until he wasn't strong enough to go and accept it and say something bad.
Oh, my God.
That's always been the rumor. So,
Wow.
But yeah,
Damn.
I never saw him where he amazed me. Even in his dotage, he was always able to still pull it out.
Yeah. Yeah, and like it's guys like that are super like that are like we can do this forever. Apparently, like this is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, somehow rock and roll is the only time where getting old in music became an issue.
Yeah.
And now it's lasted too long that you can't even make that the issue anymore.
Right. That is interesting. Like that. Like it really like had this kind of youth oriented thing to it, or even like with punk, you still see like Patti Smith killing it. You know what I mean? Like, but then like a songwriter or something, like if they weren't like kind of older, you're like, I don't believe them. Like,
well, yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, what do you like? I was writing songs since I was a teenager, but I don't think I wrote any really good songs for a long time. Now, on the new record, there's a song called "Lonesome Train,"
I love that song.
Oh, thank you. I actually wrote that song. Is 40 years old. I wrote that
really
when I was 23. That was the first time I thought I wrote a really decent song.
Wow!
And I played it in various bands. We never recorded it. It was usually kind of like done in more like a string bandy kind of fashion kind of thing. Okay. And this time I did it in this rock thing because it just really seemed to fit with the rest of the record. But yeah, that's the first time I thought I wrote a decent song.
Wow, I love that song. Like going through this record. Like going through the record, whenever I get like a advance, I listen to it before reading anything about it, just to kind of hear it, and then you know what I mean.
Oh, good, yeah.
Just to get a raw reaction to it. But anyway, like that, like this. So knowing that this was kind of like a return to roots in a way. When you picked up the Danelectro guitar, which that would do it, man. Those are sick guitars. Like there's something about playing.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, they're like funny because the one I got. It's a 59, although there's nothing precious about it. It's been through the ringer and all. It's the only time I ever bought a guitar online, just sight unseen, or just looking at it online.
Yeah,
without trying it out first, and it turned out to be just great. And Danelectros then and now are very hit and miss. One could be great in the same batch, 3 will be awful, and this was just one of those ones. And it just really. As soon as I plugged it in, it was like, oh, here we are. And it just started, I just started writing like crazy on it. And it just, the album, it's the quickest I ever wrote a record. It just all kind of fell out because there was a lot going on in my world around me. So I didn't have time to sit and write. So I would just, a lot of stuff I don't remember writing. I would just find things here and there and just put them together. And it was like, oh, that works, And so it was a different kind of writing. and which I think made it more musically immediate too.
Yeah, because I went through most of your records after listening to this to kind of get the comparison of the,
Oh,
like,
really?
well, yeah, I mean, like, to get like the comparison of like why this one's different and like what makes it more rock oriented, which is that's interesting to hear. That was the approach to it, because that makes a lot of sense. Like, and that kind of suits that type of like riff or lyric. What's going to fit, and like. But I don't think by any degree the lyrics don't match the riffage. You know what I mean? I'm just like saying like as far as how much can you fit in between these two pieces of bread. Um,
Yeah.
there's only so much physically or soundscape wise.
Well, especially if it's going by at a quick clip.
Yeah. But it's interesting like that process of when you just kind of are playing a thing and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. And for me, I have to record everything I do, or it's like in one ear out the other, then revisit and then revamp. Do you like is that, as far as like, I guess, to hear a little bit more about the process of like kind of just it coming out in this moment compared to other moments, like do you normally like have like a routine like kind of songwriting like approach? Because man, you got like 6 records and like it's prolific the amount that you put out, and like so there's got to be like some like maintenance of writing to be able to do that, and like as in-depthly as everything is, and like as like, so do you have like a routine like that?
No, I'm pretty undisciplined. I keep
Yeah.
trying to develop a routine, and it just never, life doesn't seem to let me do it that way. Now I used to have a great method, which was I'm what I would refer to as a freak magnet. So if I'm in a bar just out for a drink and there's 200 people in that bar, the one most batshit crazy person is going to sit down next to me and tell me their life story. And that's like gold. Right?
Yeah, dude.
And between the pandemic and my social anxiety issues, I don't go out as much. So
Yeah.
I've had to like get out from within more in the last couple of records.
Okay. Well, I guess like,
But no, I've never had it like. But once I latch on to an idea, that's pretty much all I want to do is work it out.
okay. And is that like, so once you get that song seed planted in your brain, whatever it is, if it's whatever the story of the dude from next to you, or the whatever like inspirato moment, that's like when do you typically just sit there and drill it out, or like do as much as you can and keep revisiting?
If I can.
Okay.
If I can get on a roll with it, yes. If I don't, and I feel like I'm trying too hard, I usually walk away from it and I do something totally mindless, and something will creep in. When I wrote, I think it's my third album called "You Never Be a Bird," which is probably the most melodic record of all mine. And it's the only record where I ever wrote all the music first, just kind of as an experiment, which might be why I'm more melodic than the other ones. But I had this job. I just started this job working at a hospital, and just in serving food. I say I don't share anything except the occasional ham,
Yeah.
I had this job where, like, during the whole lunch rush hour for like 3 hours, I just ran these fryers, making like fries and tater tots and chicken tenders and stuff, and just making them and throwing them out. And if I had and I didn't have any time to interact with anybody else,
Yeah.
because it was so busy. And after 3 hours, I just write down anything I had in my mind from that time period when I finally got a break. And that's really how I wrote all the lyrics to that, because I was so distracted by I was distracted, not interrupted by other people. That I remember I had this boss who just hated me. Like her boss was the one that hired me above her approval. And one day she was like, "You must really hate this job." I was like, "No, I love this. I wrote my whole new record on just every lunchtime just in the last 3 months." And she's just like, "Oh," and she walked away and took me off the fryer and never had me work there again.
What? Ah.
Yeah, it totally slowed down my productivity,
Yeah.
on both all levels.
Dang, like you enjoy this? Ah.
Yeah, can't be getting paid for that.
Yeah. Oh man.
But yeah, so now I'm very disciplined with my writing, but I'm lucky in that usually if I have a dry spell, once I write something, I'll usually write 3 to 5 songs in a short period, and maybe if I'm lucky, 2 to 3 will be keepers, or I can take parts out of one another and form something, one or two really good songs there.
And
Yeah,
like,
so I was more of a chop shop than a writing room in some ways. I've got notebooks everywhere. I'm pulling from different pages.
okay. That's it. Okay, cool. Like, because I know there's no right way to do this, and everyone's got and life happens. You can't just hone in on a thing. You know what I mean? Like, and and even when you do, you kind of force this thing that doesn't produce the thing you want it to be. You know what I mean? Like, I guess that's good to like to have that moment of like just focus on writing or whatever. To take that 5 minutes and write down what was fried in your mind. You know what I mean? Like, um, and those do pay off later. And like, so like, so for you, is it a lyric type first, and then finding music to fit it, or is it
It
kind of
used
hand
to
to
be.
hand? Okay.
It used to be always very lyric driven first, especially when it was the more, acoustic guitar solo guy based thing. I guess because it was just, it's one or the other at that point. And my guitar playing was much more rudimentary than it even is now. But especially as I've gotten back into playing electric guitar, it's really fun to write a cool riff, rather than just bring a song into the band and go, all right, here's a song, except we need a riff. And then, Robert or somebody comes up with, we played around something. It's nice to come in with something already because it's inspiring and it takes the song somewhere where it might not have gone lyrically before. So I kind of go back and forth between the two. But I find like a really good, a nice riff will really like bring it out pretty quickly. For me, especially these days. On the Cast Iron Songs and Torch Ballads album, the new record, there's a song on there. It's the first song on the second side, "In for a Penny, In for a Pound,"
Yeah, that's a cool one.
and that is, other than the maracas and the harmony vocals that Candace does, that is completely live in the studio.
Yeah.
Our second take. And
Wow.
I was making up the lyric. I had the chorus. We had a little time left over at the end of the session, and I had a chorus, and I just said, "All right, guys, let's do Bo Diddley beat in F sharp," and we just went for it. And the first take was like, "Yeah, something's missing," and James, our drummer, decided to double time the chorus, and we did it again, and that was it. The second take is exactly what we played. We haven't played it since. And it's just, and it was so hot and inspiring. I was just making up the lyrics as we went along. It
Oh,
was just,
really? Okay.
it was ideal.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Well, that chorus "In for a Penny," was that in your mind going into it, or did
But
that
yeah,
fall
that
out?
that was
Okay.
a thing. Mother always used to say, like, basically when you're already in trouble for something, that means you're gonna go in for a penny and for a pound, boy. I
Yeah.
know where you're going with this, and that was very true about a lot of things. It's
That's
like, oh well, if one is nice, what does 10 do?
Yeah. Well, it's like some of those, like, I guess the word would be idioms, or just like those phrases that just like you use in your everyday kind of like moniker, and just like, what I mean, this things you say, like those are just so impactful as far as like the 6 word story kind of idea of a song, where it's like or the Stooges no more than 25 words, you know what I mean? Like because they say so much and have been applied so much. And like with that song in particular, the title is like, oh, this is gonna be cool. And then when it has just that rock thing, like that's crazy to hear.
Oh
It
yeah,
was all just like kind of like in the moment. That's amazing.
yeah. It was, so we had between the pandemic and, like I said, there were some issues going on here at home. Um, we basically recorded that album. Not basically, we totally recorded all the basic tracks for the new record in 4 2-hour sessions.
Wow, wow.
I would write a song. I would just do like a demo on my phone or over at Robert's home studio, and just acoustic guitar and vocals, send it to the guys in the band. We would get together, play it, go through each one a couple times, because we recorded at my drummer's studio in his back house. And we come back the next time, listen back to what we did the time before, and either agree that was good or we do it again. And like I said, and when it got to the last thing, was just "In for a Penny" was just made up on the spot. Other than, like I said, I had that chorus. So it was all the basic tracks were done in 8 hours. You put it all together.
But there's something too, like when it just happens, like And it almost sounds like with the whole process of writing everything, it matched the process of recording for this record, as far as it just flowed out naturally.
Oh yeah, well, this is the fourth record or so with this band, other than Tom, our bass player, joined on the before the last album. But so it's been a band for quite a while, and it's a really good band. I'm incredibly lucky. The one piece of advice my mother gave, my mother was a frustrated trumpet player from when she was in high school.
Yeah.
And the one piece of advice she gave me about music was, she said, you always surround yourself with people that are better than you. Because if you're just hanging out with your friends, you're all at the same level, you'll think you're all really as good as you need to be.
True.
And she was very right. So it's like, so I mean, I know when I bring, if I think I have a good song and a good idea, you know, when I bring it into my band, I know it's going to get a lot better. So it's, you know, there's not much I can't bring into them at this point because they're way better players than I am. So I know whatever I bring in, it's going to be in really good hands. So that's very inspiring on its own right there.
Yeah. Well, and there's something too, like as a band, if someone can just kind of highlight certain things, like when you have to develop the whole thing, every aspect on your own, it almost doesn't shine as bright because of that, unless it's like someone who's very, very like keen on what they want to see and how to bring out those certain colors. Like when you have someone else like highlight certain aspects, it becomes a group unit, and now it has not just your momentum and like passion behind it, but like five people's, you know. And even if
Oh
it's
yeah,
just like
yeah.
the banjo player who's working on the Ernest Tubb tunes or whatever, I don't know. Yeah, like I don't think he has banjo. He's more of a honky tonk. Either way, you know, like just
Let's see.
someone someone who has like a little
Oh
insight
yeah. I
from
mean,
a thing.
well, and that's a two-sided thing because yeah, you can also end up with people. If you don't know what you want, you can end up with people that are really good players that will intimidate you and play over your songs because they're using that as their moment to shine
Yeah, that's true too.
about themselves and not the song. And it's a very easy trap to fall into, especially when you're first starting out. Is to, you know, to tell a good player, you know, that's great. Let's do the same thing, but do half as much. You know, not everybody responds to that well.
Right, right. You're like I'm giving you all my shreddage, and you want to
Yeah,
shred
it's like,
it.
yeah. I always tell people like, yeah, when I've had bands, especially, you're not getting paid by the note. Just relax. You know, listen, take a verse and a chorus and listen.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, do you find like working on like a record that's more rock driven, like this one, compared to like Smoke and Mirrors, where there was some kind of slower, more ballad tunes and like story
Sure.
tunes? Do you find like it's easier for the band to like contribute to the song when it's more of a rock driven thing compared to like a narrative driven song?
I think so, but I think it's not about the band. It's about how precious I'm being about the songs.
Oh, okay.
Maybe like the
Yeah.
Smoke and Mirrors, like that was. I have two albums I've done which are actual concept albums, and that's one of them. And that's a record that I worked on for 10 years in the writing. And so I was very set on what I wanted that record to be. And it was a testament to somebody that I loved dearly that I wanted to like put the best light on. And, but I also had the luxury of doing it with a band that was so good and knew me so well at that point. I could be very open to what their suggestions would be. And I could be very trusting of it, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
no, that totally makes sense. And
Like
like,
if I had made that record with a different band, and I attempted to years before, it would have been a much more precious record. And as much as that record is very, you know, very lyric driven, and it's just the whole thing adds up to telling a single story. You can listen to it song by song, and the ones that rock really rock, and the ones that don't, I hope are equally moving a different way. Whereas when I tried to do that with other musicians, some of their songs in an earlier form, it just wasn't. They weren't connecting with the material, and I had to put it away. If that makes sense.
yeah, no, that totally does. Cause like, I think that was the first one I listened to after listening to Cast. And like the song about Super Freak and like the son, like I was like, damn, This is beautiful. Like sometimes it's just those things that like stick out that everyone knows that like drive this like this time, this frame, this like reference that kind of like builds the whole atmosphere. In this case of the record, because it kind of is that through line, not just but like the narrative of it. Like and yeah. But that's so that does make sense. Like especially was like sorry, that does make. I'll finish my sentence. That does make sense, especially like when it's something that's so well crafted narratively that like it would be more intricate in that sense and less in the other. Was Rosetta Please the same type of process?
Yeah, and that was a completely different band. That was the first full band I had when I was living in Memphis. And that was the same thing. That was, that was when I talked about the freak magnet thing about you meet somebody in a bar. It was literally that. And it happened 20 years before I wrote the record. But I was in a bar one night in South Jersey, and this guy just said, hey, if you listen to my story, I'll buy you drinks. And I thought, how bad could this be? And it turned out to be very bad. It just rolled around in my head for years. And I finally, I took what little I knew of his story and wrote what I thought the rest of it might be. But I had to really, but as an album, it was a very tricky one to craft because it's telling a very, it's a story about a guy I meet in a bar whose girlfriend is a prostitute who's out working the streets to pay his bar tab and consequently mine too.
Yeah.
Right? and like, and the whole time the guy's telling me this thing, I think he's just some drunk who's just blabbering on. And then the woman comes in at the end of the night with her John and leaves the money and goes off with the John. And I realized, oh my God, this is true. And it just never left my mind. And at one point I just, rather than try to make it a song, I made it an album because it was just too much to make in one song for me at that moment anyway.
Right. Well,
but it was
sorry.
And it was a very different band. And it was, like the bass player in that band, Maggie Veazey, she was 17 years old when we made that record. It was her first thing she'd ever been involved in. So it was like, and the guy who played all the lead and the lap steel guitar was her father. And that's also a weird dynamic to have a father and daughter in a band.
Yeah.
It's like, they would go out on the road, like right before we go out on the road for like 2 weeks tour or something, Maggie would come in with a new tattoo and like her father would be really mad, but he couldn't say anything. We're all there. And they wouldn't speak for like days. And then I would have to like get them to talk. And I realized, I said, one day I was like, you aren't making money playing with me, but you're saving a fortune in family counseling. So, it's something, But, but they were, that band was not the band that could have made this record either.
Right.
And I don't think that this record, we can play those songs, but it sounds very different when we play them now. So it's all, I tend to like, once I started recording, I tend to write towards the band I'm probably going to be working with. And I don't know if that's smart or not, but that tends to be the way I seem to work.
That to me that makes sense because that's the crew you're going to arm and to go out with this record. Right for the people you're with,
and now I'm lucky enough. Like I said, I have a band, and I don't think there's anything that I can musically bring in that they can't take and make better. So there's nothing holding it back other than me at that point. Like what do we do next? Who knows? I don't think it'll be free jazz, but other than that, I think it's pretty wide open. And I like free jazz, but
right. That's a whole nother like thing to try to craft. It's structuralism on like a whole nother like viewpoint that I can't see. You know what I mean? Like
what? But I had the craziest thing with how I was a pretty casual jazz listener.
Yeah.
And mostly listen to the stuff most people listen to. And about 7 years ago, I got really ill with what turned out to be a thing called histoplasmosis, which is the thing that almost killed Bob Dylan in 97 or so, whatever it was. And basically, this thing had attacked my heart, and it almost killed me. They caught it just in time. But for about 6 months or so, I could not listen to electric guitars. Huh. It just made my head crazy. And I've talked to other people who have had similar heart ailments, and that happened to them too. But I could listen to really free jazz stuff. That really entertained me and worked for me, which was always never did before. It was very crazy. Now I can listen to it still, but it took almost dying to be able to relate to that.
Well, closer to chaos may make sense, and when life is chaotic like that, like
yeah,
or
because my body would be fine, and then literally I'd be walking across the room, and I would just fall over and almost die.
Oh my God!
Because this thing grew on my lungs.
Yeah.
That eventually, after years, nobody caught it, and it surrounded my heart, and every now and then would just try to pop it like a balloon.
Oh man, wow. That's intense. And like, how long did it take?
It was so intense.
Like, how long did it take to like know what it was? Like, how many
It
years?
took 6 months for a doctor to finally figure out what it was. They were just batting me back and forth between this doctor, that doctor, and this. Yeah, this is here in Memphis, and I got this one doctor, and she was a younger doctor. She was a pulmonologist, and she just wouldn't let it go. She just wouldn't let it go. And she told me, she goes, I can't sleep at night because I can't figure this out. And when she finally did, it was really funny. She calls me in and she's like, we got a lot to talk about. How do you want to start this? I said, what's the worst scenario? She goes, you want to start with the worst scenario? I said, well, I'm from New Jersey. I said, I'm from New Jersey. She goes, well, I'm from Philly. That makes sense. And we immediately bonded. And and she figured it out, and they caught it right before it got to the point where I was going to need open heart surgery. If they had gone about 2 months, I would have had open heart surgery, and my life would have been completely different.
Yeah. Well, just even
so I'm very lucky.
Yeah. Wow. And just like that's the passion you want a doctor to have for sure. You know what I mean? Like.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
She's gotten a thank you in the last 2 records, and she will continue to.
That's wow. That's just like they try to be figuring it out. One thing, like musically, like with your heart having a certain type of rhythm to it, like in the lack thereof rhythm, maybe that's why it also made more sense.
I think, I do think I'm a much better rhythm player now than I used to be, and I have wondered if the arrhythmia thing had something to do with it.
I did not even like pun intended, but it very well could, because that's how you process.
I never thought of that until recently. That crossed my mind.
Yeah,
because somebody in the band was going, "You're really, you're obviously practicing. You're just much more of a dependable rhythm guitar player. Because usually the guy that's played a lot solo isn't when he blends in. A lot of times it's." And I wonder a lot of times if that has something to do with that. When I see my doctor again, I'm going to actually ask her about that.
Maybe like you're circulating blood through a certain,
I would advise anybody, a quicker way would just be to knuckle down and practice.
Right. Put the metronome on. Strum it out,
Yeah, a metronome will be more your friend.
Wow. Dan, thank you so much for your time, man. This has been a really awesome conversation, and I've really enjoyed diving into your career and like picking your mind on writing in these records, and like the fact that do you still when you're planning the tour with this, are you playing the tour? Are you rolling with Ben, or are you going to roll solo dolo?
I'm doing one by band.
Yeah, but I mean, like, without, like... So the last time you were in the Beachland, it was with Ben, like, on a solo acoustic thing.
Yeah, we were both doing solo set.
Gotcha.
He was in town for that, it was a Q&A at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah.
And because Greg Harris, who's the CEO, he used to be the Ben Montgomery's original... he was their road manager originally, and I was the sound man, and I became the road manager when Greg left. And so he was going down to do the Q&A. So he's like, why don't you come with me and we'll do this. We'll just do a set at the Beachland.
Okay. Yeah. I remember him telling me about that.
So I'm looking to come back and do a full band show somewhere in Cleveland in June, actually.
In June. Very cool. Very cool. Well, Dan, thank you so much for this conversation, man. This has been awesome.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And so it's really, nice to have somebody, delve into more than just the release date,
Yeah. No, I like
which is important too. April 7th.
April 7th. It's also very important.
Thank you. But no, it's really nice to have somebody who's like listened to it, done the homework. Like I said, when I listened to the interview you did with Ben, I realized, oh, this guy does the homework, so I better be ready. And you did, so I appreciate it.
Oh, on a side note, were you around with the Cubist Blues thing Ben did? Were you hanging around? Did you know Alan
I
Vega
wasn't
too?
I wasn't working with Ben anymore then, but I heard it before most people did and all. I wasn't on the scene for it. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for that.
Yeah, that's
That was done. There was a period where I moved to Michigan for a while, and that was when he was doing that then.
okay. Okay. Where'd you
But
where in Michigan were you? Were you Detroit?
but what was really great about that, I had been at that point. I hadn't written anything in a long time, and I got this job at a factory there, at a bottling factory in Grand Rapids. And for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, I stood on top of this rickety ladder in front of this conveyor belt. And at the other end of the building, this alarm would go off and the gate would go up and a truck would deliver a couple thousand empty Snapple bottles. And it would come down this conveyor belt. And my whole job was just to stand there on this ladder. And if any of the bottles were knocked over, pick them back up straight so they could go past me into the cleaning area. And I just sat up. I stood on this ladder and I had a place I could put a notebook. And I wrote half of the songs that became my first album right there, and just a ton of songs that actually ended up being on the Sin Repent Repeat album later on. So it was like the worst job and the best job at the same time.
Yeah. Is there like, I guess that kind of end up.
So I owe Michigan a lot, even though it was not my best time in my best years.
It's interesting because it seems like the physical, like doing the job where your body's physically doing something that doesn't really require thought allows the mind to really kind of like wander and like find these like nuggets. And like is this kind of like something like, is that like a comfort for you as far as like writing, the like physical meditation in a way where your body's doing something?
Yeah. I've never been like a formal meditation person. I don't know. I just can't turn my head off enough. That I keep trying and it just doesn't seem to work. But I always write better when I'm doing a job where I don't have to think, especially if I don't have to interact with other people. I just think that's for me, that's a really great way to write. And I'm trying to think of how I was going to put this, but yeah, it is like a meditation in that way because I can do something repetitive and I'm not have concentrate on the job and my mind will drift and that's all I need then. And it's like, and my theory is always like, if I can remember this when my break comes up from whatever the task I'm doing or my job or whatever, if I can remember it and write it down then it was worth remembering.
Okay.
Yeah. If I didn't have a place where I could write it down right then, it was like, if I can remember this 2 hours from now, then it was worth remembering. Yeah.
Right. And like, but that's interesting because like I find that too, like with like doing a thing, like letting the mind, like for me, driving to like teaching, like I don't have time to not like to manually just do a thing and think about something else. It's always like, attention needed here now. Like, but like when you have that, like the thing where you're doing something physically and your physical needs or your physical, like, cause if your body wants to move, it can move, it wants to move, right? You have this like kind of bodily resolve in a way where
it knows what it's going to do already. It doesn't have to check in with you.
Yeah. And that's when those thoughts really wander and you land on those. Like if I get enough coffee and like I'm driving the right direction, I guess like I get that same like that maybe not same but a similar sounding experience.
Oh yeah, and that's like my wife she can always spot. She's like, you're writing, aren't you? You can tell it's something's brewing around in there because you got to get that thing, and you haven't quite had the chance to sit down and write it out yet or work with it, but you know where you think it's going to go, and it just starts rolling. I can't think of anything else in that moment,
Yeah, that's awesome.
But the other thing is with writing like that, I think it's also is like because guys like us, people like us, we also do have to have have always had to have a job.
Yeah.
I think if you were a guy who came up, if you're a writer who came up and all you did was go to the Brill Building and write songs, if you're Carole King and Jerry Goffin or something, you've been doing that since you were 17 years old or whatever, you probably have a routine and a way you work.
Right.
But for us, that was never going to be, for people like us, that was never going to be a luxury we were going to have.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you had to learn to write when you could write, and you have to learn to, you know, when inspiration yells out incoming, you got to be ready to take it.
Yeah. But
Because it's not going to stop at your house. It's going to go somewhere else. It seems like.
that's a good way to put it. You're right, and you're right, and that's like this whole other like when you really have to like keep everything going and make any time that it starts to become all the time as opposed to just a set aside time. Which I guess when someone like me is like, "What's your routine?" You're like, oh, "I don't know. I'm always doing." Like that's also a really like profound way because there's a lot of people that are you can't do music full time without finding your way in things you have to say yes to. You know what I mean? Like there's
Oh,
too many
God, yeah.
avenues. Like
Yeah.
uh,
I mean, I love the idea that, Nick Cave used to like put on a suit every day and go to his room and write for 6 or 8 hours.
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
love that idea. But I think every time I've tried to do that, not the suit part, but every time I try to do that, I tend to psych myself out. Like, okay, I'm going to write something now. If I don't have an idea already, that's just the surest way for me to not write anything and get really frustrated with myself.
Right, right.
I wish I was that disciplined, but I just haven't been. And I just don't think I've had a life that lends itself to that. But I don't think there's a right or wrong way to write either,
I definitely agree. And it's interesting, like maybe like for like someone like Nick Cave or someone who like really takes that maybe that's their way of doing the job that no one bothers them at. You know what I mean? Like when
Oh, totally.
they
Yeah.
get that solitude in a way to like kind of reflect. And like I think when you're kind of like someone has to do all this stuff, like the fact that you're not doing something, you're like, I should be, making sure I can eat tomorrow. And like in a way that when you are doing that, it allows your mind to go into that, like, okay, now I also got to write this state. You know what I mean? Like it allows that like
Oh,
comfort
yeah.
for the solitude. Like,
Nothing haunts me more than a list with unchecked boxes.
yeah, yeah,
I can't turn my head off sometimes because things are just, because, when you're doing it at this level, you're not just the artist, you're the record label, you're the publisher, you're
right.
the promoter,
The
and
press.
I don't say that, I don't say that to bitch, it's just how it is,
Right, right.
So it's, you don't have that luxury of just like, well, I'm going to the office, dear, to write for 8 hours. It's just not how it is. So when it comes in, I never want to ignore the muse or I want to look at it or the antenna because, like I said, I don't believe it's going to just sit here and wait on my desk. It's, it's going to move on to somebody else, it seems like.
Was it? I think that's well said. On that note, my friend, on that note, like, I want to thank you again for hanging out with me and letting me pick your brain and getting to dive into your career. It's been, like I was saying before, it's like this for me. This keeps me going. I like this insight search, and the fact I can write it off as something that I get to share and helps other people is cool. So thank you.
Oh man, thank you. Like I said, it's really nice to talk about anything. It's about things other than just the release date.
Oh yeah,
It's really refreshing. And this is like the first long form podcast interview I've done. So I hope I did all right.
You killed it, man. This is awesome. Like it's